The great moments, the sad memories, and the lovely young monarch. Australians, it seems, just love a parade.
I am very glad that I have had this opportunity of meeting so many of the children in my first visit to Australia.
From the first Royal Tour in 1954 to the football finals every year.
The Melbourne Cricket Ground, remodeled for the Olympics, packs in 100,324 spectators for the Australian Rules Grand Final between Melbourne and Essendon.
Australians have always turned out to see our favourites, our funerals.
Nearly 150,000 people wait to pay their final tribute to Jack Davey.
And our floats and processions. In our century, it seems, we just had to be there.
Melbourne's streets are thronged with a crowd only slightly smaller than the vast concourse of people who turned out to see the Queen as the city's Moomba Festival gets underway.
It was probably the biggest turnout of Australians in our century. The Royal Tour of 1954. I was in third class at Janali East Public School, which is a couple of working class suburbs up the railway line. And they bussed us out here, thousands and thousands of school kids, right along here, along a stretch of the Princess Highway they call the Mad Mile. It was a scorcher of an afternoon in February. But I can't tell you how really excited we were to be here. And we waited for hours, even had our sandwiches here on the grass. And finally there was a roar of the crowd somewhere up there and lots of cheering. And the big black royal limo came past with the royal couple who gave the royal wave as we waved our Aussie flags madly. And they were gone. And then we all went home. Like the rest of Australia, this was one of those times in our century when you just had to be there.
Over the city of Sydney, the brilliance of a summer's day has broken. It is the 3rd of February, 1954. There'll be no work done today in Sydney. 1 million of us are on the move, swarming into the streets like bees in the sun. A city and a continent are waiting.
The clipped, almost English accent of Australia's own Peter Finch, narrating a film about the one day of our century.
For a queen is coming. A queen we have never seen.
History was made on that sunny day in 1954, when Australia welcomed the first ruling British monarch to our shores. As the Royal Yacht Gothic sailed up Sydney Harbour, more than 1 million of her most loyal subjects strained for a glimpse of their new queen. It was one of those days when you just had to be there. This was the biggest crowd of Australians ever to gather in one place to witness one event.
I want to tell you all how happy I am to be amongst you and how much I look forward to my journey through Australia.
And here they are at last, amongst us, moving in triumphal progress through each city in its turn. Sydney first, boisterous, open-handed Sydney. Now it's good-hearted Adelaide, keeping a special place for the kids who couldn't stand on tiptoe like the rest.
Australians were spellbound by their young queen. Elizabeth's was the royal fairy tale. A beautiful young princess forced to take the throne after the untimely death of her father, King George. This was a fairy tale Australians all wanted to be part of.
She came as the living symbol of the unity of crown and people, wearing for us the dress that she had worn for her coronation.
The Royal Tour was sold right out, right across Australia. Capital cities and country towns turned out to be part of history. It seemed we just couldn't get enough of the young Queen and her handsome consort.
Of course, the big cities had to have their big do's. But when it came to the country towns, why, we just opened our gates and our hearts at our throats. There was Bathurst, for instance, belling out its greeting from the Carillon. And a bouquet for the Queen from one of the tops. Of course, she'd rehearsed this for weeks. But when the moment came, she kept her little head fine. There was Elizabethtown in Tasmania. The pipe band was out in full strength. In towns like Rochester, the Queen walked so close you could have touched her. Echuca had a present for Princess Anne, a waltzing Matilda doll.
We dressed up, always in our best frocks, and we waited. Sometimes the whole town turned out just to see the royal train rattle past.
On again, along the cheering pathway carved by the royal train with its two big purring diesels, through the cheering junctions and the cheering whistle stops, past the endless stream of hands and flags and handkerchiefs, and the endless faces laughing in the sun.
In a grand finale befitting a Queen of the Empire, school children from all over the land were licked and polished, versed and rehearsed, and dispatched to do their loyal duty. Now, if you were an Aussie schoolchild in 1954, only illness or the tyranny of distance would have kept you away.
The transport people in every state said it was one of the biggest mass movements since the war. We had our hands full, I can tell you. For the last time, Billy Jones, will you stop pushing? You see, there were departure and arrival timetables to be drawn up and kept to. And would their uniforms get crushed? And would they sit on their hats? And would anyone get lost? And would they get to the right place and remember what to do? And above all, would there be enough to eat?
Exhausting months, and it was all over too soon. It was estimated that nearly 6 million Australians had turned out to have a look at Her Majesty. Now that's not too shabby when you remember that at that time Australia's population wasn't even 9 million. The royal love affair began in 1954, and for some Australians the fires still burn today in spite of the Republican push. It seems you just have to be there.
2 months that none of us can ever forget. Elizabeth of Australia. She had come to us out of the Tasman Sea, out of the morning sun. Now she sailed away into the westering evening, into the Indian Ocean. God speed you both and bring you back again.
She may have been singing about a faraway monarch, but the lady with the exquisite voice was our homegrown idea of royalty. When Parliament House opened in Canberra in 1927, it was Dame Nellie Melba whom we asked to sing God Save the King. She'd been born Helen Porter Mitchell. She changed that to Melba in honour of her hometown of Melbourne. It was Nellie Melba who headed off to London seeking fame and fortune. By the start of our century, she'd become the toast of Europe and Queen of London's famed Covent Garden. Loved by the world, she was still our Dame Nellie. She was still one of us. So it was no great surprise that in February 1931, Melburnians gathered in their tens of thousands for her funeral. We lined the procession route and followed Dame Nellie's cortege all the way to her final resting place in country Lilydale.
Truly, Australia mourns her greatest soldier. 100,000 people line the streets.
Just 6 months after Dame Nellie's death, we were back out on those same Melbourne streets. This time to farewell the man said to be our greatest military leader. Sir John Monash was a Jewish engineer, a citizen soldier, who led the Australian Army during World War I.
The vast procession approaches the Shrine of Remembrance, the monument now being erected in memory of the fallen. It was Sir John himself who planned and fostered its growth. And there it stands on the skyline to be something worthy of those who had made the great sacrifice.
Australians felt they had to be there to show their sorrow. So they hung their heads for heroes, like wartime Prime Ministers Billy Hughes and John Curtin. While 100,000 mourners turned out for the funeral of the legendary fighter Les Darcy. But while the city streets could be grey with grief, we preferred to paint them gold with gaiety. From the big cities to the tiny towns, street parades have been a way of life in our century. Any old excuse. We've crammed the streets in costumes and cavalcades, on floats and on foot, to celebrate and commemorate anything from flowers to fallen soldiers. Sydney had the Waratah Parade and Melbourne had Moomba.
Moomba means let's get together and have fun. And that's exactly what 500,000 people do as the Moomba procession comes to town.
From bagpipes to brass bands, small towns could be big on enthusiasm. It wasn't enough just being there. You also had to be part of it. And the trouble is, if everybody took part in the procession, there was nobody left to watch. There was no shortage of bright ideas. An old cattle truck could end up as a big hospital bouquet, or the family car could look like a fish out of water. A local princess made the parade just perfect. And kids in coloured costumes would always march past the post office. While little girls dreamed of stepping out like big girls. And you could talk about a bush town going gay without anybody taking offence.
There are plenty of bands as the town goes gay in a week of celebration. And there are decorated floats picturing the industries of the surrounding district. Barcaldine honours timber too. Everyone is having a wonderful time. The festivities are called the Golden Fleece Celebrations, and the Wool Princess has the place of honour. A week of fun in Barcaldine.
Australia is a sports playing, sports watching, sports talking, altogether sports-minded country. That's how an American writer recently described the Australian scene. There must be something in it. Nearly every Australian enjoys playing and watching sport.
Over our century, the great thinkers have all had a go at trying to figure out why sport plays such a huge role in our lives. Competition seems to be part of the national character. And if we want to play our favourite game, nothing seems to stop us. And when we can't do it, we like to watch. Because if there's one thing that's guaranteed to pull a crowd, it's a sporting superstar.
I like football, there's a lot of things around. Line them up together, the footy wins hands down.
Club games in Melbourne alone every Saturday converts more than 150,000 normally rational citizens into an hysterically cheering partisan crowd.
There's nobody who just has to be there as much as an Aussie rules footy fan. Since it began in Victoria in the middle of the last century, it's been more like a religion than a game. Invented to keep Melbourne cricketers fit during winter, Aussie rules was soon so popular that even Mum and the kids were screaming their lungs out every Saturday. Now, every footy code has its fanatics, mobs who dress in tribal colours and act like maniacs. But the biggest mobs are the Aussie rules fans. And way back at the start of our century, the biggest crowd puller was not even on land, but on water. Back then, the boating regatta was Australia's main outdoor event. Its origins lay in the early years of the colonies, when men would race their boats out to meet the visiting ships. Rowing and sailing races became Sunday's big event, and Sunday was the family's holy day and holiday. People dressed to the nines, and they crowded any spot they could to watch the races.
Today is People's Day, when everyone gets into holiday mood for the Royal Hobart Regatta. It's a monster birthday party. Almost 1/3 of the entire population of the island state is in attendance.
Now, just because you don't have water doesn't mean you can't have a boat race. Not in the territory anyway. In Alice Springs, the not-so-mighty Todd River drags them in for the annual aquatic festival. Any excuse for a cold drink.
Talking about water, the sailors of the Alice could do with a little right now.
If there's one single Aussie event that captures our imagination more than any other, it's the Cup.
They're all set for the 30,000 Cup. They're off and racing to a brilliant dispatch, and there they go.
It began back in the 1800s, when 4,000 punters turned out. For much of our century, the Melbourne Cup has stopped the nation on the first Tuesday each November.
And they're racing in the Cup, man.
Up to 100,000 people from all over Australia pack a picnic lunch and dress up in their sassiest or their silliest, and they go off to Flemington Racetrack to watch a long-distance sprint that lasts less than 3 minutes and pulls in more than $100 million. And when we couldn't actually be there, we'd go to extraordinary lengths to see the Cup as soon as possible. For this 1944 Melbourne Cup, Movietone News used 9 cameras to make sure that our troops overseas didn't miss a thing. When the winning horse crossed the finish line, the mad scramble began to get the news film to our boys in the Pacific.
The undeveloped negatives are handed to Army amenities officers. Army motorcycle escorts ensure fast transport from course to drone.
To save time, Movietone developed the film on the plane on its way to Sydney. It was cut and dried upon arrival, printed, transported, and on a makeshift screen in the jungles of New Guinea within 30 hours.
And it was a great start, and one of the first to begin was Sirius, and near the rails and Clayton. When they settled down, Clayton would be the lead.
As we've seen tonight, Australians love being there. We love going out to the footy, to famous funerals, street parades. We love going to the races. This is the most famous winning post in Australia, the Flemington Racetrack. Now, we've all been here to do our dough on the Melbourne Cup. There's nothing that draws a mob in Australia more than the Melbourne Cup. First half of the century, we came here via newspapers and radio and newsreels. But since 1956, we've been able to come here or anywhere just by switching on the box. Television puts us smack bang in the middle of the mob. without even leaving the lounge room.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are interrupting the dancing now so that you may listen to the Queen's speech, which is being broadcast from the State Banquet at Canberra. Thank you.
Tonight, I am glad to have the opportunity to express my gratitude to my Ministers of State in the Commonwealth of Australia for their hospitality. In the short time during which we have been with you, and we have come to know something of the warm-hearted loyalty of Australians in cities, towns, and country districts. This country offers wonderful opportunities for men and women from the old world.
The Our Century book is now available wherever good books are sold. For all the memories and images of the past 100 years, be sure to get your copies soon.
I pray that Australia will continue to prosper, and that from this national capital will come wise leadership and good government.